Assalamualaikum, and good morning and welcome to the third in the Southeast Asia Regional Center for Counter-Terrorism series of webinars. My name is Asrul Daniel Ahmed, and I am an analyst with SEARCCT, and I will be your moderator for this session. First of all, I would like to check whether the participants can hear us clearly, as we wish to avoid any technical difficulties from affecting your experience. You could let us know by typing in your feedback in the chat area, and we'll see whether we can attend to it. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this is the third in a series of webinars organized by SEARCCT. In the first webinar, the issue of the outlook of terrorism during the post-COVID-19 pandemic was discussed, and we looked into issues such as the situation with far-right extremism, Daesh, and other terrorist groups in Southeast Asia. Whereas the second webinar, we looked into the need for new strategies in counterterrorism in what we're calling now the new normal. So we explored things from the angle of the enforcement, judiciary, as well as when it comes to counter-narratives. Ladies and gentlemen, today's topic will be about managing hate speech, an urgent and timely concern in today's world, and one that has been made even more salient with within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we have seen a rise in expressions, both public and private, of animosity, resentment, and outright hatred towards individuals and groups based on their ethnicity, religion, gender, and other identity factors. In fact, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had even put out an appeal in May earlier this year to address and counter hate speech arising from the circumstances of the pandemic, and referred to the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, which was only launched last year. Right? It seems increasingly urgent for us to have a thoughtful and informed discussion on the issue of hate speech and the various efforts that can be done to manage it. And with that in mind, we are fortunate to have three very distinguished speakers with us to share their thoughts on the matter. I will introduce each of them in turn at the beginning of their presentation, but please allow me to welcome them to our webinar. We would like to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Jasminder Singh from the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, in Singapore. Also to Dr. Ahmad Muhammady from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, and to our very own Jasmine Jawhar from SEARCCT. We would like to express our thanks to them for accepting our invitation to speak. Before we go on into the webinar proper, allow me to briefly explain the format of the webinar, as well as touch upon administrative and housekeeping notes. For your information, each speaker has been allocated 30 minutes for their presentations. During their presentations, we would like to request that all other participants to kindly have their microphones muted so as to avoid any disruptions during the presentations. You can unmute your microphones when you are given the floor, and we request that you have the microphones muted once more after you have spoken. We also request that you turn off your cameras during the presentation to reduce the streaming load and improve the quality of the video stream for everyone. Of course, this doesn't include the speakers who are speaking, right? If you would like, you can turn the camera on when you are invited to speak, all right? And when all of the distinguished speakers have delivered their presentations, we will open the floor for question and answer session. We have limited time, though, for the question and answer, so we would like to request that participants to submit your questions in the chat space, along with your names and organizations. And time permitting, we will submit your questions to the speakers. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, all right? Jasmine Jawhar is currently a research officer at the Southeast Asia Regional Center for Counter-Terrorism. For her bachelor's in international relations from the University of Queensland, Australia, she did her thesis on Jamaah Islamiyah and the manipulation of religion in terrorism. Before coming to SEARCCT, she was a researcher at the Prime Minister's Department, focusing on security developments in Southeast Asia. She has published and co-authored a number of monographs on topics ranging from the terrorist use of the internet as well as the Lahad Datu incursion. Ms. Jasmine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Asrul Daniel. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you can hear you.
Okay. Okay, let me just share my screen here. So everyone can see that? Yes? Yep. Okay. All right, okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Asrul Daniel, for the very kind introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all. First and foremost, I am very, very grateful to be part of such a distinguished panelist. I've known Dr. Ahmad and Mr. Jasminder for many, many years, and to basically discuss an issue that I must say has saddened and at the risk of sounding as dramatic as my 4-year-old son, rendered me speechless in the course of preparing this presentation and the research in general. In fact, so in fact, it has led me to question whether humanity itself is getting angrier. And like a good modern researcher that I am, I Googled it. Yes, I Googled it. And the first thing that came up on my Google search after typing up, is humanity getting any angrier or is humanity getting angrier? The first Google article that came out was a Washington Post article in April 2019, and the title of it was, "Nope, it's not just you. The world around you really is getting angrier." And I was like, and I thought to myself, you know, I found the grandest of solution. SEARCCT should now focus on conducting anger management programs, and that would be my entire presentation. Yeah, but unfortunately, that would just be scratching the surface or wherever. Unfortunately, the reality of mitigating hate speech, particularly one that incites or promotes violence, is not so simple. And one possible reason, I believe, for this is the lack of awareness or simply forgetting the severe impact hate speech could bring upon humanity itself. And here, I would like to begin with a bit of history. And I'm not going too far back. I think some experts have actually argued that one of the oldest hatred in the world was anti-Semitism, and that fueled the Holocaust and killed millions of people. So I'm not going back as far as that, but let's just go back to April 1994 in Rwanda, when more than 500,000 Tutsis were killed by the Hutus. Hutus were basically the majority with the ruling government, while Tutsis were the second largest ethnic group in the area. And I think there were only three or a few more of these small minority groups in the area. So the hatred towards the Tutsis can be traced back to Belgium's favor over the Tutsis, the Tutsi minority, when Rwanda became a Belgian trusteeship in post-World War I. So this act of basically favoritism led the Hutus to harbor great resentment towards their neighbors. There were also reports of Tutsis oppressing the Hutus during this colonial period. So when the Hutus gained power in 1962, ethnically motivated violence continued, reaching its peak during the Rwandan genocide in 1994. In the interest of time, however, I will not dwell too much into developments between 1962 and 1994. There were many, which also include the emergence of the Revolutionary Movement for Development, the NRMD, and the Rwanda's Patriotic Front, RPF. So, however, these two entities were very pivotal in the Rwandan genocide that would follow in 1994. One of the major example of hate speech in the context of the Rwandan genocide was name calling. The Hutus, in their effort to dehumanize the Tutsis, resorted to calling them degrading names such as Inyanzi, meaning cockroaches, and Inzoka, meaning snakes. Metaphors were also used to demean the Tutsis, such as cut down all trees. This is in reference to the Tutsis' lanky physique. This name calling and dissemination of hate propaganda by the ruling government at the time was effectively done through the use of radio station, namely, well, let's just go with its abbreviation, RTLM, because it was in French. And I forgot to take French classes in school. So the station owned by the NRMD was used by Hutu leaders to spread anti-Tutsi disinformation and hate propaganda. So including spreading fear to a Tutsi genocide against the Hutus, basically this was the disinformation to the illiterate masses, and basically they also identified specific Tutsi targets and their whereabouts. So this was done through radio stations. So the station also played, apart from that, the station also played trending music, encouraging participation of the public, and managed to attract a lot of people, including unemployed youth, also militias. So in short, quoting the Atlantic, the RTLM, the radio station that was pivotal in spreading hate propaganda, was very successful. It managed to basically plant a seed of discord among the moderate Hutus, who were slowly drawn into this extremism fold. So this was the role that the radio station played in terms of spreading hate speech. And this was the Rwandan genocide, the role of hate speech in basically facilitating the conflict, or basically sorry, okay. Yeah, so that was the Rwandan genocide. And now if we look at the present climate, the Syrian civil war, and going into the Syrian civil war now, is an important event when we discuss the use of media in disseminating propaganda. So with modern technology, social media platforms have been very effective avenues to spread hate propaganda, disinformation, and extremist views. According to the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression, SCM, and I quote here, 1 in 5 media products contains some element of hate speech. This includes so this includes platforms across print, TV, radio, and online, showcasing a mixture of both modern and traditional media. So one of the most notorious actor in the civil war would be the so-called Islamic State, or Daesh as we here would like to call it. Daesh, knowing the importance of media and online platforms in spreading propaganda, radicalize and recruit, among others, has successfully built an extensive media infrastructure for these very purposes. So high quality magazines, radio stations, video propaganda, audio statements, and nasheeds even have all been utilized and spread by digital platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as online communication applications such as WhatsApp and Telegram. Using, among others, the method of generalization, hate speech is rampant throughout the media propaganda. The West, whether to denote the government of the US or UK and or their allies, along with their citizens and supporters, are referred to as the Crusaders, leading to incitement of hatred on historical context. So meanwhile, Shia is referred to with a derogatory term known as Rafida or rejectors, which also has its root in history. So in this instance, when Daesh entered Mosul in Tal Afar in June 2014, the properties believed to belong to the Shia community were basically marked with the letter R in relation to Rafida. Further to degrade Shia sect as such, Daesh resorted to its online magazine called Dabiq. In Dabiq issue 13, the Rafida from Ibn Sabah to the Dajjal, the feature article with the same title quoted a letter from Sheikh Abu Musab to Osama bin Laden stating, and this is a form of propaganda and hate speech as well. So the Rafida, in reference to the Shia, are the insurmountable obstacle, the lurking snake, the scorpion of deception and malice, the prowling enemy, the deadly poison. So they were referred to as this. And hate speech is also directed at others as well during this time by Daesh, including to Muslims who Daesh believed did not adhere to their brand of Islam, and other ethnic and religious minorities whom they regard as kuffar or kafir. So this type of speech has given a sense of false legitimacy or of killing so-called unbelievers. So, however, the Syrian crisis did not only witness the use of hate speech by rebels and extremist groups like Daesh. It was also used by political affiliates, the supporters of the Assad regime and its opposition as well. So, basically, players in that conflict, which is using hate speech and derogatory terms to dehumanize, to delegitimize their opponents. So the speeches were heavy on utilizing stigmatization and advocating for aggression and violence against one another. So some examples of this would include the sinful regime or the criminal regime to denote the pro-Syrian regime, to refer to the pro-Syrian regime political groups. So one thing that I would like to point out here is that the Syrian civil war is a good example of violent extremism leading to hate speech, as opposed to hate speech inciting violence against a targeted group. So though this is not something out of the norm, it is nonetheless important to remember and distinguish between hate speech that incites violence and or extremist views or acts with violent extremism that essentially leads to promoting hate speech. So looking at the Myanmar conflict now, and as with any conflicts, the security and social implication it brings is not only towards the source country, but also the neighboring countries. Closer to home is the conflict in Myanmar. As a result of severe persecution of an ethnic minority, and in this case, the Muslim Rohingya, located in what is known as the Rakhine State in Myanmar. And again, here we see derogatory terms being used to either garner support or gain its legitimacy in violence that many experts and international organizations have claimed to be of ethnic-cleansing tendencies. So United Nations Human Rights investigator has even gone as far as claiming that the type of hate speech taking place in Myanmar is one of institutionalized ones, where government officials openly promotes anti-Islam sentiments among the public. So it was reported in the media that the Myanmar's Minister for Religious and Cultural Affairs has even described Islam as an extreme religion. Extreme nationalist ideologies have also been ingrained in school children as young as those in the 4th grade, with lessons encouraging, and I quote, the loath of mixed blood as it prohibits progression of race. So once again, social media is at the center of fueling hate speech among the public. Facebook and other social media platforms were used to describe the Rohingya community as rapists, and that they should be fed to the pigs, burned alive, apart from referring to them as illegal immigrants, despite having resided in the area since many, many generations ago. So these terms were basically used to project hatred against the Muslim Rohingya with the objective to dehumanize this ethnic minority. So as a result of this, and of course, years of facing persecution and the eventual uprising by a fraction of these affected people in the affected areas, such as the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army or ARSA, we saw in August 2017 one of the biggest refugee influx into Bangladesh. Roughly more than 740,000 Rohingya, including 400,000 children, into Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, making it the world's largest refugee camp. Now, Bangladesh is not the only destination for these refugees. Other countries started receiving Rohingyas who fled Myanmar, looking for much safer place to be, whether permanently or otherwise. So Malaysia, Indonesia, and India are some of those countries. In Southeast Asia, and particularly Malaysia, it was reported that in October 2019, there were about 100,000 Rohingya residing in the country. A small number of them in Indonesia, while Thailand was regarded as a transit hub before entering either Malaysia or Indonesia. But of course, there's still many numbers of them in these countries, and as well as other countries across the Asian continent. So where this sort of migration happened, it may also cause friction in the host country, where they're also mostly regarded as illegal immigrants. So let us now turn our attention to Malaysia. A bit fast here. Sorry. So, extremism and hate speech in Malaysia. So with the current COVID-19 pandemic, like our kind moderator has pointed out, a lot of hate speech became very apparent at that time in Malaysia and elsewhere. So, and with hate speech in Malaysia, Rohingya were once again among other things, at the center of this public scrutiny in the country. So video calling for Malaysian citizenship for the Rohingya started circulating, and this led to tension among the locals and the Rohingya community in the country. But some disputed the authenticity of the video. Many from this community received death threats and voiced up their fear of potentially being attacked by the general public. Following this were a series of fake news and disinformation being circulated on social media in relation to the Rohingya community. So words of the community dominating the Selayang market in the city started to gain traction, and a demonstration video, which turned out to be a video in 2015, again another example of disinformation, fake news, were recirculated to provoke the public and create hatred against the community. So this is a stark example of disinformation and fake news being used to facilitate hate towards a certain community. And this is not to mention other incidents that took place before and during the movement control order to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 in the country. And this includes hateful comments towards the Tabligh cluster, the Chinese community, and a lot of other small groups or clusters. So the composition of Malaysia makes it a little bit more challenging, or rather easier for hate speech to spread. But it's more often than not, as with in other countries as well, sparked by a certain event or incident. So, for example, the case of implementing learning of art in schools or calligraphy, art in school as art exclusively related to Islam and by extension the Malays, hateful comments started flooding on social media, causing a lot of tension between races in Malaysia. Then there was obviously the Sri Mama Mariamman temple riot in which a fireman was killed. So in response to this incident, this is somewhere that this sort of incident and racial tension that grew out of this sort of incident, racially motivated comments started to emerge on social media platforms, and not only targeting certain races, but also against government officials. So in addition, this incident has also been cited as basis for planning terror attacks against government officials, important persons in the country. And this was revealed this was revealed following the arrest of a number of individuals, both local and foreign, including those from Myanmar. So there were a couple of them from Myanmar who were arrested, and one of their reason for planning a terror attack in the city was to avenge the death of Muhammad Adib, who you can see in the slide here, who was killed, the fireman who was killed in the temple riot. So and another case was also cited, another planned terror attack was also cited as to cited the Mariamman riot and to avenge the death of Adib. So there were a number. So we can see this kind of incidents or racial tension that erupted based on this and led to violent extremism as well. Uh, So the impact of hate speech and violent extremism on violent extremism. In all of these examples of violence and hate speech, the most common factor is the use of some form of media to facilitate hate speech or hate propaganda. In the past, it was of course the traditional media such as radio stations, be it government-owned or underground media outlets, as well as printed materials, among others. However, today with technology, we have additional and undeniably more powerful tools to spread hate among targeted community and even beyond. So the use of social media such as Facebook and online communication apps like Telegram have been instrumental in planting seeds of discord among its users. Through such platform, there's also another continuing development, or rather observation, in the expansion of the propagators of hate speech and or hateful extremism. Today, with social media platforms and the internet in general, everyone can contribute to the discourse on hate speech, and basically be the one coming up with hate speech, hate propaganda, as well as the spread of hateful comments. So this is as opposed to in the past, like the Rwandan genocide, the Bosnian conflict, where hate propaganda were propagated by politicians, public figures, and other form of authorities. However, I won't be going too much on this subject, as I'm sure Mr. Jasminder will take a look into this hate speech and the use of social media platforms later on in the session. Through these examples, we have also seen how hate speech has both fueled violent extremism as well as helped facilitate the cause of violence and how it worked to garner support from the masses. So the impact of years of hate and discontent towards the Tutsi minority in Rwanda had led to genocide, while the Bosnian War against the Bosnian led to ethnic cleansing, as with the current persecution of Muslim Rohingyas in Myanmar. So Daesh reign and hate propaganda towards the West, Shia and other minority groups in Syria and Iraq, as well as against Muslims who do not adhere to their brand of Islam, has led to fractions of individuals taking up arms and threatening the security of countries around the world. So we see this in Indonesia, where a number of Daesh supporters had been captured for their intention to target Shia communities and Christmas celebrations in the country. Such atrocities in which hate speech has played an instrumental role, whether before, during, or even after have led to conducive environment for mass migration. So this is another impact of once hate speech has taken place, conflicts and whatnot, on a bigger scale, of course, and it's led to conducive environment for mass migration. For example, in the case of Syria and Myanmar, as a result of the Syrian and Myanmar crisis, mass migration took place throughout West Asia and Europe, as well as East Asia, respectively, while millions have been internally displaced in these regions. This has created a number of other issues as well, not only in the source country like Syria and Myanmar, but also in neighboring countries and regions. This includes the many humanitarian crises we see today, along with food security issues, sanitization, and others. So in general, mass migration could also fuel another form of violence, and that is right-wing extremism. Anti-migration sentiments and white supremacy ideologies have long been an issue in Europe and other Western countries as well. And today we see these sort of sentiments continue to be fueled and actions in the form of terror attacks taken against those deemed as invaders and traitors, so to speak, talking in reference to these immigrants, so-called immigrants in the Western countries, in Australia, in New Zealand. So the attacks on two mosques in 2019 in Christchurch, in New Zealand, were a testament to this sort of sentiments. In a manifesto distributed online, the attacker Brenton Tarrant resorted to using derogatory terms to express his hatred towards Muslims and others who he deemed as attempting to replace white culture and ethnicities with their own. And equally as important is the potential rise of other forms of extremist groups, including religious-based one, and the persecution of the Rohingya community in Rakhine saw the rise of groups such as the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, ARSA, and we also see this in the Syrian crisis with the rise of tens of rebel groups, whether it is opposing the government or otherwise, merging with Daesh or merging with other groups, so on. We see that happening a lot with this kind of crisis. So this brings me to my final point under this subsection. This may be more of an observation rather than a point intended as an impact of hate speech and violent extremism, and that is the definition of hate speech and basically violent extremism. I know that the norm would be to begin by my presentation with the definition, but I thought it would be fitting to bring up the topic at the end after a series of examples were given. Now, this is also because in general, as with almost everything else in this particular field, there is no general consensus as to what constitutes hate speech or violent extremism. But with some of the examples given this morning, I would like to propose the definition of hate speech as described by the United Nations in the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, as mentioned by our kind moderator, Daniel. And the paper argued that any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are, and this includes religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor, would be regarded as hate speech. So now that we have laid the grounds of what hate speech is all about, or try to, or attempt to, and how it has led to violent extremism in varying degrees, examples of such atrocities have been discussed, and the impact it has not only in the source nation itself, but neighboring countries and other regions. Now we're left with the golden question: how can we best address this hate speech issue? How can we best address hate speech or mitigate the issue? We have a problem here, because it's not easy, at least in my opinion. The challenge here is that, number one, while we can argue, we lack a concrete definition what constitutes hate speech. And I always believe that if something could mean anything or could be seen as one thing in a certain incident and mean another on a different occasion, then it's useless. It means nothing at all, because it's very dangerous. Biasness can creep up, and all sorts of other problems can come up. And furthermore, with certain segments of society arguing along the lines of freedom of speech and expression, a concrete definition of hate speech becomes even more imperative in a sense. But since we have been getting by just fine with not having a universal definition of terrorism or even violent extremism in this case, having a solid definition of hate speech may not be as immediate as the second challenge, which is striking a balance where it matters. This is because, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say thank you. Just realized it was here. Everyone can see how much thought I put into my PowerPoint slides. Okay, so what was that? Okay, so which is striking a balance where it matters. So this is because managing hate speech is a tricky business, as it almost always touches on sensitivities. So targeting or involving certain ethnicities, religion, or culture. So in short, it almost always touches upon a person or a group's identity, because that's what basically hate speech means. And this is a very sensitive issue. So, but efforts to at least curtail the impact of hate speech must be taken seriously, because the consequences of it could be far more dire than anticipated. As stated in the special report, rapporteur to the UN Human Rights Council, and I quote here, a failure to monitor and react to hate speech in a timely manner can actually reinforce the subordination of targeted minorities, making them vulnerable to attacks. So this can be seen actually in the case of the Christchurch attacks in April 2019, when the Islamic Women's Council of New Zealand was said to have repeatedly warned the police of an imminent threat against the Muslim community in the country. And by extension, the group argued that these warnings, if heeded by the police, properly heeded by the police, could have saved the lives of those lost in the mosque attacks. So basically, apparently they received threats through social media and whatnot of a threat that apparently was to happen on the day of the Brenton Tarrant's attack on the two mosques. But although those threats were not connected, it was just a mere coincidence. But they were arguing the fact that and they reported it to the police, and they said that, look, if this was if you guys had, the police had taken this a little bit more seriously, then we would have heightened up security in the at all the mosques in the country or in a specific area on that day itself, because there were some threats that wanted to attack mosque on that day itself, although it was not connected to the real attacks itself, which isn't being considered. So they were arguing that as well. So we can see how if we don't take hate speech seriously, and these things, these major atrocities can actually happen. So in light of this, and in my attempt to stay relevant to our topic this morning, allow me to give some thoughts on the way forward in dealing with hate speech, violent extremism, and all its manifestation. So the way forward, so I've spoken about the challenges, and I think that this issue of hate speech is whether, I would say it's a new thing. Maybe it has been going on for a very long time. It's just that we've been looking at it now as hate speech. So I think one of the way forward would be to promote awareness. I think it is always important to remember how hatred can basically lead to so many atrocities. And this can be seen throughout history with the Holocaust that thrive on anti-Semitism, the Rwandan genocide, the Bosnian War that led to ethnic cleansing in the name of self-determination, and many other wars that resulted from this or from some form of hatred. So history can show us that the adverse effect of this. And in this instance, promoting awareness on how hate speech can lead to, whether unintended or intended, consequences beyond imagination through history is something that we can all look into. And so the second one is promoting social cohesion, national unity. So looking at the national level, the need to promote social cohesion and national unity is becoming even more imperative. The COVID-19, with everything else, as we can see in a number of cases here in Malaysia, a non-racial incident can quickly escalate into racial hazard, sparking tension between the different races in Malaysia. And in promoting national unity, I think that programs such as the National Service or PLKN, now it's no longer a thing here in Malaysia, it can be of great value. And in the effort to encourage social cohesion and tolerance among the different races, religion, ethnicities in the country. And this would also work well for those who attended religious-based schools or vernacular schools. I've heard so many stories about that. I was not part of that age group that had to go to PLKN because I was that young. But yeah, I've heard so many good stories about PLKN and what it has done to sort of get people together, different races, different culture, and people actually learn. The kids actually learn to tolerate one another in the sense that through understanding of each other's culture, religion, and race. So this is very important, I think, to promote social cohesion, national unity in that sense, because most of this hate speech and that could potentially lead to violence. It starts from sort of misunderstanding, in my opinion, of course, intolerance towards other people in any form, like it could be their race or culture or their orientation and whatnot. And so the last point that I would like to make here is that since we see a lot of hateful comments on social media these days, digital literacy becomes crucial in containing the spread of hate speech. It is therefore important to ensure that schools and netizens in general use the internet and social media in a responsible manner, with the hope to build resilience against negativity that strikes from hate speech. You see a lot of examples of another form of hate speech, I believe, is also cyberbullying in terms of, a person being targeted, like especially school kids, bullied by, condemning their looks or in whatever way. And this has led to suicides in a lot of these youngsters. In the youth, we see this in the UK and many other countries as well. And for them to be able to especially schools and netizens and Gen Z use internet and social media in a very responsible manner, and try not to and build resilience against negativity. This would I believe would essentially help in the sense that would not lead to such we call that such negative outcomes like suicide, like and other things in general, like ethnic cleansing movement. So basically, that is my presentation for this morning, and I thank you so much for your kind attention. So Daniel, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Jasmine, for your wonderful presentation. You've certainly given us a lot to think about, giving us very, very useful examples about how advocacy of violent extremism is now actually happening through hate speech. And for some of your proposals, like raising awareness, will definitely be something we should consider. Now, from Ms. Jasmine, we now move on to our second speaker of the day. Well, in counterterrorism circles, actually, he is a person who needs no introduction, but I guess I'll just have to introduce him anyway. He's Dr. Ahmad Muhammady. He is a counterterrorism analyst at the Extremism Analytical Research Unit of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC IIUM. He is also a consultant to the special branch, the Counter-Terrorism Division of the Royal Malaysian Police, and has testified in Kuala Lumpur at the Kuala Lumpur High Court as an expert witness in terrorism-related cases. He is part of a rehabilitation team appointed by the Ministry of Home Affairs to rehabilitate militants detained in Malaysia, and he is a very good friend to SEARCCT. Now, the floor is yours, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asrul Daniel, moderator from SEARCCT, my co-panelists, Jasmine, and also Mr. Jasminder Singh from RSIS, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to thank SEARCCT for inviting me to participate in this discussion. And I think this is the series 3 of the discussion on the issue of terrorism. And SEARCCT has done a very good job in terms of informing the public, educating policymakers on this, and I'm very, very supportive of the work.
Sorry, Dr. Ahmad, your voice is a little low. Can you find a way to raise the volume of your microphone? So sorry.
Okay, can you hear that?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Yes, I think there's a very good initiative on the part of SEARCCT to organize this kind of discussion so that we can inform the public more and educate policymakers and the public as well. In this opportunity, I would like to share with you not so many points. I have only 7 points to share with our participant in our discussion this morning. Okay. All right. I hope that you can see the slide. Yes. Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can, sir. Go ahead.
I have, as I said earlier, I have only 7 points to share my thought on this topic, that is hate speech and terrorism. First point is that hate speech and terrorism is not a new thing. I mean, it's not a new phenomenon. If we go to history, and we can see this thing happen in the past, during Middle Ages, for example, and a lot of historical evidence indicated the linkages between the two. Jasmine has mentioned a lot about, give a lot of examples just now on what happened in the past, the linkages between violent extremism with hate speech. And we also have seen some historical document and literatures, for example, the Mein Kampf, Hitler. If you read Mein Kampf book written by Hitler, you can see that how the personal grudges or personal grievances that he has experienced turn into a kind of doctrine that he has written in the book and later become a national program for Germany. We also can see the same thing happen in Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, from narrative to doctrine to ideology and organized program. And Tamil liberation movement also, we can see the discourse that they have as a reaction to discrimination policy, injustices to Tamil people, to become a well-organized political struggle. And Jasmine has mentioned as well about this. And if you also follow the discourse of Osama bin Laden, I follow this, his sermon, his writings, and I have a lot of his writing available in the internet. We can see how he justifies hatred on the basis of religion and politics. And Singh goes to Daesh, especially the book on management of the savagery by Abu Bakr Naji is an Arabic book, actually translated by Harvard University. You also can see the same thing. And in Europe, for example, we can see person like Brenton Tarrant, great replacement. This happened in New Zealand shooting on March 15, 2019, and Anders Behring Breivik to publication 2083, a European Declaration of Independence. So these are some of the document and literature that we can see the link between hate speech, the discourse of hatred to the act of terror. It's meaning that it is not just only an idea, okay, but it is also an action. So that is the first point. Second point, we have to remember this, even though we don't like hate, but hatred, the sense of hatred is a part of human nature. We do have sense of hatred or aversion towards something or person or certain event or idea and etc. So it is a part of human nature basically. So as a human being, we do have this sense of hatred toward others. So we cannot deny this fact. I think it is quite hypocritical to deny the fact that human beings do have certain degree of hate. But having the sense of hate is not a problem per se. Okay, what causes hatred is another thing. I think that is this is linked to the point number 3. The problematic hatred, I call this, that is a deep, intolerable, and uncontrollable hatred toward things or others or person or idea. And these root causes could be coming from political, religious, racial, cultural justification. Okay, so the sense of hatred is part of human nature. But what caused it? What are the root cause of that? Is it because of the political reason or religious reason? And it is still acceptable or okay in the sense that if you have this kind of sense of hatred and you keep it for yourself, that is still not dangerous, unless you translate it into a kind of well-organized movement, or you turn into a movement, for example, religious movement or political movement. That is getting more dangerous. So you see how it escalates from just an idea, I call this cognitive radicalization, to be more overt manifestation of radicalization in the form of movement, political movement, religious movement, and later we have mobilization or the action, the actual act of violence, for instance, the actualization in physical harms to others. So that's why hate speech is actually defined as the expresses hate or encourage violence toward a person or group. Okay, so it must have the elements of physical harm to others. That is number 3. Number 4, hatred and radicalization is closely connected with the discourse of hate. That is conversation back and forth within a community, between individual, with hatred-laden content. I have seen this, for example, conversation of Black Crow group, Gagak Kumpulan Gagak Hitam. The conversation among themselves, it actually contain the hatred-laden content conversation that later translated in the form of terrorism. And we also we have seen, or we discussed this in the first point just now, that is the existence of some document, historical document and literature about that relationship. The question here is how hatred drives people to radicalization and then terrorism. So there are three stages here. It starts with the discourse of hate, the conversation, just like they are having like a posting in the social media, they're having a private discussion in the low profile manner, and then it become an organized movement, or it become an ideology. So when you talk about ideology, then you can see that it is no longer an individual opinion, but now transformed into a larger group, and it is subscribed by a certain community. And it doesn't stop there. It moved to the stage 3, that is actualization or mobilization. This is where you can see happen in the case of Nazism in Germany. You can see this thing happen in Sri Lanka, even in Middle East in the case of Daesh, or in the case of Al-Qaeda. It starts with the discourse of hate, it become ideology, and later mobilization or actualization. And this is also connected with the root causes, as I said earlier, that is, could be political, or religion, or the race, culture, or economy, or sexual orientation. Number 5, radicalized politicians and social media influencers. This is a new phenomenon, in my opinion. In my view, the discussion on radicalization and hatred is one-sided, because we often focus on public in general, or the youth, the student, and so on and so forth. Today, we are observing the emergence of a global rise of radicalized politicians. So I think that this is a new trend. A politician who promote the discourse of hate, practicing the discourse of hate, or supportive or sympathetic to radical movement, or foreign or domestic, and they have a strong followers too. So we don't talk about this. I think we should highlight also there are certain politicians, whether it is a domestic or national politician, or the world leaders, who are radicalized. But we don't really talk about this, or maybe it is not a popular discussion now. But I think that if we start having a discussion about the threat of radicalized politicians to the world stability, or to social harmony, to political stability, then I think that we can gain more traction on this. This has happened recently, I think this week. There is a Singaporean influencer, Zia Zui. She was under fire because of the, I mean, social media influencer also could be one of the person who caused radicalization, or who actually promote hate speech. Number 6, hatred and political radicalization. I think this is another phenomenon, that is political radicalization. Is getting more serious these days, and it is more dangerous than religious radicalization. This is not what I said, actually. This is, if you know Yazid Sufa'at, I met him a few months ago when he was released, and I asked him, what do you think about radicalization in our country today? And he said, Doc, you don't worry about religious radicalization. Now, what is more dangerous today is not religious radicalization, is political radicalization. And he said that actually I joined radicalization, or I joined Jamaah Islamiyah, is because I was politically radicalized first, and later on I advocate religious radicalization. So he observed the same thing. I mean, I spoke about this so many times before, about the rise of political radicalization among the public and also among the politician, that we can see this in the social media posting, public talk, or private conversation. And I think another point is in the post-COVID-19, the rising anti-Asian sentiment, or the anti-China sentiment. We can see this thing happen, especially in European countries, and also in the Northern America and Latin America, the anti-Asian sentiment. I joined this one group, they call it Asian Hustlers. It's a group of businessmen who are doing business in the North America. They were complaining about the business, their business has been badly affected because of the COVID-19, and they're raising sentiment of anti-Asian in the Northern America and also in Europe. So business has been badly affected because of the COVID-19. And of course, xenophobia, as Jasmine mentioned earlier, we is afraid of the coming of foreigner to our country. And of course, in addition to Islamophobia before. So we're having more problem these days. And so this is point number 6. And the last point is a conclusion, and I have one proposal. SEARCCT need to move forward from educating the public to educating politicians, especially parliamentarian, on the issue of extremism, hate speech, terrorism, and radicalization. I think this is the solution. So we're talking about managing hate speech. So my proposal is we have to educate our politician, because politician or parliamentarian today, they are less educated in this. With all due respect to their position as the representative of the people, but I believe that they also need education in this issue so that they are getting more, well-behaved, especially in parliament. You know, if you look at the parliament sitting recently, I think that they need more education on this. And we need to have a orientation program for all parliamentarians, which is made compulsory for them to attend. And we can actually work together on the modules. So that is my proposal, and I would like to close my sharing this morning with one quote from Bertrand Russell. The hatred is foolish, love is wise. That is, I take this from Bertrand Russell, British philosopher. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad L, for your very insightful presentation. Definitely coming up with some ideas about problematic hatred, cognitive radicalization, and of course, something quite interesting for us to think about, to shift away from just raising awareness among the public, among youths, but also to regard it a possibility to engage with perhaps radical politicians and discuss the topic, which is not very popular in current circles. So thank you very much for quite an insightful presentation and sharing, and I think that we will benefit greatly from your suggestions. Again, I would like to remind everyone for the question and answer session, I would like to invite you to place your questions in the group chat so that we can limit the time that we present in the question and answers so that it will become a bit more efficient. We request that you put your name and your organization along with your question, but that's not necessary because we know some of these questions can be sensitive. All right, from Dr. Ahmad L, we now move on to our final distinguished speaker for this session. Mr. Jasminder Singh is a senior analyst at the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research, Center of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang University, Technological University, Singapore. His main areas of work focus on the study of extremism and terrorism in Southeast Asia. Mr. Jasminder's research and writings have focused on recent developments in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines in the field of extremism and terrorism, and measures undertaken to counter the threat and challenge. His works have been extensively published both in Singapore and internationally. So today, Mr. Jasminder will be talking about hate speech in social media. The floor is yours, Mr. Jasminder. Sorry, Mr. Jasminder, your mic seems to be
okay,
off.
Yep. Can hear?
Yes, now we can hear.
Yep, it's clear. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. I'd like to thank SEARCCT for giving me this opportunity to present, and it's always a pleasure to be presenting with you all, and good presentation from Dr. L and Jasmine earlier. So today the topic I have is managing social hate speech in social media, a very interesting topic here that we have. And wait 1 second. So as we look at social media, I think this has become a very big concern when we are looking in today's age and technology. Hate speech in the online sphere has become a major concern. I mean, everybody uses smartphones. Everyone has access, especially we are looking at Southeast Asia and then moving on to other parts of Asia, especially in Europe and America. And the platforms there are so many. And even as we talk, every day there are new platforms which are coming up. And the hate speech arena actually keeps on expanding. So for today, when I talk about social media, I will basically be looking at 3 major platforms, which would be Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, because these are the most common ones that we see in Southeast Asia and which we are also probably most familiar with. When we look at the role of social media, I think it's important to see that social media has two things that social media does. One is to host. And the other thing is to disseminate. When we're looking at hosting, we speak about social media platforms providing the space for individuals and even media to make their content available to the public. So this is where we see basically it becomes a platform to host. All this, you can basically have whatever information that you have and you don't know what to do, and people just use it as a platform for sharing. And here in this case, social media becomes a dissemination device. So it's a service basically to spread your content, whatever content. So in the initial stages when social media came about, it was there to connect individuals connected with each other, friends. You could be in Malaysia, you're connecting with friends in Southeast Asia, especially those in Europe and America. And over time, the evolution on the role of social media came that, okay, one step ahead was to go ahead sharing news. Today, social media has become a platform to share ideas. And that is where now the thin fine line has come across to what actually is the role of social media, since we are talking on the topic of hate speech. And this actually becomes very critical. And basically now the issue is governments around the world are talking is what exactly should social media be used for, since we are seeing violence being basically spread and carried out and even shared and propagated on social media. Social media companies have been basically now in the last 2 years especially scrutinized, and they have been forced to relook at what their policies are. So first we'll talk about is Facebook. Facebook, they have been saying, look, we do not allow hate speech on our platform because, they have so many arrays of reasons. They do not want to create an environment of intimidation, exclusion. And also Facebook has been used, Facebook Live, when basically real world violence occurs, you suddenly see cameras popping up and everybody is just recording, and even the attackers the perpetrators using Facebook as a platform to propagate their ideas. So Facebook has come under a lot of scrutiny. In Singapore, we have seen former Home Affairs Minister Dharman Shanmugam. He's been saying, look, why can't Facebook do anything about it? So Facebook has had to relook at its policies. So in the last 1 year, from my understanding, having some conversations with Facebook, they have been looking to how to basically relook what their policy and come out with something new, but they're having difficulties. So which is why in the last point on this slide, we have is define attack as violent or dehumanizing speech. So what has been seen where hate speech has been is to look at a large part of their policy on the dehumanization part, because previously they were just looking at hate speech means I hate you, I want to kill you. But basically now it seems that it's something more. And when we are looking at how Facebook detects, so now you have options. You can actually complain, you can lodge a report to Facebook regarding hate speech. So they have, this is the process here, an image to share how actually the process where Facebook takes to basically take down hate speech. But that alone is actually, I believe, is not enough, and it's not good actually, because I've actually tried this in the area of hate speech, and sometimes because they are policy. So the issue here is Facebook is an American company. So it might not, some of its policies, I believe, again, it's my personal opinion, I believe it might not suit us Asian countries, because in America, their laws are different. They do have various amendments and their laws. So it comes to the issue of freedom of speech. What is freedom of speech? And the thin line between hate speech and freedom of speech. That is a problem which many countries in Asia are facing. We have seen in the issue in Myanmar, India. I think in Singapore, we have been very strict that we certainly do not want Facebook to be used as one hate speech. And then on top, of course, the other thing which is very going on today is the issue of fake news. So fake news, we have seen issues of fake news and hate speech coming together, which is a problem as well. But I think Facebook is having difficulties to actually grasp the issue with governments in Southeast Asia, especially. Here we can see hate speech on Facebook. From 2017 to 2019, you can see the amount of hate speech that there had been on Facebook and how they actually, the percentage that has been flagged. And we can see the increased, suddenly the amount actually has, as much as the increase. So both ways, the amount of hate speech acted has basically gone tripled and doubled, and it will probably go even more, because now there is the issue of Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter. We talk about anti-Asian sentiments. We talk about various different, so you can be anti-migrant sentiments as well. So I think there is a big challenge here for Facebook. How is it going to actually cope with this issue of hate speech? And with COVID, even the issue and the situation has worsened, because on one hand, Facebook says we lack manpower. And on the other hand, they are coping with governments saying, look, we're going to ban you if you don't do anything. And thirdly, the users so Facebook has become like an online wrestling ring, whereby the anti-hate speech movement versus the hate speech movement. So these examples are basically fresh examples which I have to share with you all. So in the case, we have seen a lot of Islamophobia. Two Facebook groups. The one is Council of Ex-Muslims of Bangladesh. The other one is Should We Ban the Burqa? So we've got this is from India, the anti-Hindu movement. And of course, White Lives Matter is another new group which has been born against out of the Black Lives BLM movement in America. So we can see how basically as human beings, we react very fast to what is going on around the world. And we see that Facebook actually cannot do much. So which is why I think there's a lot of call for social movement groups and other groups to come and say, look, we need to say what is the definition of hate speech where social media is concerned. Twitter. When we look at Twitter, they actually are doing much better than Facebook in terms of taking down the material where hate speech is concerned. I have seen that actually they act much faster, because if you have to look at how on Facebook, what we have are groups, private groups, but fortunately Twitter does not allow that. So Twitter in a way is very active and proactive in its own way to actually take down anything that is considered under hate speech, and their algorithms pretty good, I would say. So for example, again, coming to the topic of Myanmar, so Wiratu basically, while on Facebook, I have discovered or rather seen that, some of his pro-Wiratu pages are still existent on Facebook. It is not the case on where Twitter is concerned. So Twitter's algorithms probably are working much better, and they now do have this policy, what they call as, they don't call it hate speech, but they call it hateful conduct. So they're saying that, look, your conduct online. So, we have what we see online and offline actually has quite a bit of a connection. So, what probably is said online is being translated into online content. So the online and offline interaction, human interaction is actually very important for us to also see, because when we are doing background studies and we're looking at what actually is going on, why is this individual being, we could say, radicalized, or why does he hate this person, this gender, this race, this religion? It's always important to see what is actually going on offline, rather than coming to say, look, I'm just going to come to a conclusion that this individual is a racist, he or she promotes violence, and he or she promotes hate speech, I think it's very important for us to see what actually is going on offline and offline. There will be a connection. Hate speech on Twitter, Dr. L spoke about, and this anti-Chinese sentiments here we have got at the bottom here. Hey, Chink, go back to your country. So you can see this is all during this COVID period. Then we see about Islamophobia is probably the biggest problem where Southeast Asia is concerned, because we see this whole issue where in Thailand, whether in Myanmar, we have got this issue of the Buddhists versus the Muslims. I think in Malaysia, in Singapore, we have been able to contain this sort of thing much better because of our how our society is. So we have got Chinese, Indians, and Malays. So it's a historical thing. So as Dr. L also said, look, we have to look what actually is the historical context to hate speech in the country. In Indonesia, they are having a lot of problems grappling this Sunni Shia problem, because to them is the Shia, whatever the Sunnis say is correct. And I think I certainly agree with Dr. L's, the thing where he spoke about, the political radicalization. So politicians actually play a very important role, especially we are seeing in the example of Myanmar, how they're propagating the anti-Rohingya propaganda, whether it's been online, offline. In Indonesia, we see religious figures playing the game of politics. In India, it has become very prevalent, looking at the BJP government spreading through religion, talking about the Hindutva. So I think that is and it can become a problem for us in Southeast Asia, because we have to understand we have a very big migrant community coming here to work. So whether they are coming from South India, North India, again, so hate speech again goes to, if we can't say that, look, all people, only those people who are in the West or they are whites are actually propagating hate speech. We have got many of our own Asian friends, brothers or sisters, actually propagating this sort of hate speech. And hate speech, it also born out of exclusivism. YouTube is interesting, is that they are very fast also in removing the hate speech content. As we can see, look, I'm just sharing with you all what are the areas which they have put as the markers to contribute and to identify individuals, what is considered hate speech, how do they remove their content. But again, there are a lot of difficulties in doing this, because when people put on their material online, once they realize that, look, if I put under a certain identity, it gets removed, they are using other identities or in other languages which YouTube might not be familiar with. So by the time YouTube actually removes the content, it is probably a few hours, a few days. And then the content keeps getting reshared over and over again. So that becomes a challenge, that how do we actually basically stop this content from being online. And we also see that, look, they have done a lot. YouTube is doing a lot to actually to take off hate speech. But the issue then becomes I think the issue that all social media companies are facing today is in their country of operations, the law of that country. So for example, in Singapore, we always raise is that the question, the problem we have with these social media companies is that we have to keep stressing to them is, we are not America. You are not operating in a Western environment where there is so much of freedom of speech. So it is the onus of the social media companies to actually understand the cultural and religious norms of the country with which the content goes out to. Of course, it becomes a very thin line, because they turn around and tell us that, look, the laws being applied to us are American laws. So I think that is where the challenge lies today. Looking at the implication and challenges are actually much more fearful that, look, the danger of hate speech in Southeast Asia, and as I said, we are multiracial, multi-religious, and multilingual societies. How does hate speech grow? And hate speech we are going to see it grow, because as COVID ends and new ideas form, people are going to start blaming, like in Europe, for example, they are saying that there is this doctors are saying that South Asian men are actually more prone to death where COVID is concerned. So the issue is, again, then the issue in Europe is why, being a white is better than being an Asian. So we see that form of the speech being spread about. The challenge for governments is huge today. How do we, so in Malaysia, we have seen Singapore also, Indonesia is having a problem because we see how the government, actually the new government today has got a lot of religious figures who are associated with groups which are said to be racially intolerant, radical. Myanmar is quite obvious. In Thailand also, they're having problems. How do we solve the problem in South? In the Philippines also, even though they're in the Philippines, they're not so open that as to what is the issue in the southern Philippines. And to them, it's a far problem. And then if we go back to outside of Southeast Asia, the issue, of course, would be in India, because there is a big Hindu movement, which is basically sowing a lot of discord. And a lot of these individuals associated with these movements, especially in India, have actually moved into Southeast Asia. So we see them in Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. And of course, now the issue of the Black Lives Matter, and like I said, White Lives Matter, and far-right extremism is actually on the rise, as everybody is just looking at Islamic terrorism as a problem. And the downside of it actually has become is that the rise of the white supremacists, an issue which everybody said had died down with Ku Klux Klan finishing off in the US, and that, the issue of whites is not a problem today. But we see how Europe, especially Germany, being taken, and the ideas of Hitler coming back, and the ideas of Hitler as these far-right groups in Holland, in Germany said that, look, his ideas are relevant as ever. So the issue is that hate speech is basically the new weapon in cyberspace, and is going to unravel the harmony in society. How are we going to challenge this? Governments have been putting law. For example, in Singapore, we do have the Sedition Act. And now the Singapore government has been working for the last 1 year to see how hate speech online can actually lead to you being sentenced. So it becomes a jail sentence and a fine as well. And then there would be the law would basically be taking over such cases. So I think the challenge now is to have for more governments and to embrace the fact that firstly, hate speech is an issue. We need to address the problem, and how actually we do have various laws to tackle this online, because previously it was just an issue of offline. So the challenge is, how do we actually go about tackling this problem online and embracing it? And as we said, like I said, Malaysia, in the case of Malaysia, it's also a big melting pot. We see so many nationalities gathering in Malaysia, whether they're using it as a transit point, whether they're using it to come to work, study. It becomes a problem. How do I accept everybody? Of course, there will be problems. Even in Singapore, we do have a lot of problems now with COVID. Everybody is saying that, look, all the construction workers are an issue where Singapore is concerned. Look at the numbers of COVID casualties where they're there. So I think the problem is that how do we actually contain this problem? And the government is actually addressing it by saying, look, okay, let's all come together. Different communities have to come together and have a discussion. You need conversations, and we just can't say that we are going to solve this problem later on. And social media companies are being forced, whether they like it or not, they have to actually have a conversation with various stakeholders and with society and bring this problem to the ground to say, look, yes, it is a problem. Our platforms are being abused, and we actually want to do something to ensure that we continue to exist, because the companies know that if they allow their platforms to be used as a platform for hate speech, the governments of the day would actually come after them in whatever form they would. Like, for example, we see now TikTok is out of India, and TikTok has the largest number of users in India. So if one country says, I want to ban Facebook because it's causing religious problems in my country, I think if Singapore does it, other countries would also say, look, we need you out because you're basically causing problems for social fabric and social harmony and stability and nation building in my country. So with that, thank you very much. I end my presentation here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jasminder, for a very interesting presentation.